Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. On the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status, the Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected. Therefore, it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, but you just said you're not investigating.
No. You and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me close with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.